Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I've been doing this video thing on YouTube for about 10 years now. And I remember years ago when I started doing videos every single day, I thought to myself, I wonder if I can keep doing this or if I'll run out of stories. I mean, will the universe keep supplying me good stories? And, if you sent me a note right now and said, Steve, Hertz is in the news because they did something stupid, I go, it's not news anymore, right? It might be a news story there, but it's still old in one sense. And so when will the universe stop giving me good stories? So Chris sent me notes to Steve, here's one I don't think you've seen before. And he's right. From WTNH out of New Haven, Connecticut, Eva Zymeris wrote this. Man accused of stealing New Haven police cruiser with officer inside. The guy stole a cop car with the cop still in it. And, we talk about criminal geniuses from time to time. Super geniuses. A man accused of stealing a police cruiser with the officer still inside and then crashing it into a church, because why not, appeared in the New Haven Superior Court recently. The man's 49 years old, has been charged with second-degree larceny, second-degree kidnapping, assault of public safety personnel, and second-degree criminal trover, and interfering with an officer. Chris said, by the way, Steve, I've never seen a criminal trover charge brought before. I actually Googled the phrase criminal trover, and up popped a whole bunch of statutes out of Connecticut. So I'm not sure how many other states have got it, because this story took place in Connecticut. It was captured on surveillance video, and it unfolded just the other night. It started outside the department substation, where the man allegedly approached the cruiser that had an officer inside. He then yelled at the officer to get out of the car. But before he could, police said he jumped into the driver's seat and took off. So presumably the cop was not in the driver's seat, otherwise that'd be uncomfortable. The officer pulled the steering wheel, which caused the cruiser to then veer off course and hit a church on Congress Avenue. The officer was injured, but is expected to return to work in a few days. New Haven Police Union president said, this incident reinforces the unpredictable and dangerous nature of police work. It also highlights the professionalism and restraint displayed by our officers in the face of imminent danger. The man who did this has a lengthy criminal history dating back to the early 1990s, according to police. The police said he's been arrested more than 80 times. 80 times. So, I don't know what the other 80 times were for, but I wonder if any of them involved second-degree criminal trover. The man expressed to me that he's working through some psychological issues, and this conduct, as you can tell, is mental health and addiction related, his public defender said. I assume that's in court. The judge set the man's bond at $300,000. He's due back in court on August 29th. I don't know if he scraped up that money or if anybody did on his behalf, but I highly doubt it. But I'd like to point out, I've talked about this before, and this is what makes this interesting, besides the comedy of it, is that we've talked before about theft. You taking something that is not yours from somebody else. And the laws have been diced and sliced so many different ways to make sure everything is covered. Because if I run up to you and threaten you and grab something off you and run away, that can be robbery, the use of force, right? But if there's something just sitting there and I know it's yours, but I decide I want it and I grab it and run off with it, that can be theft. But it's not robbery. And so there's all these different distinctions. And so some states have codified these things very, very well. And Connecticut has on the statutes at Title 53A, Chapter 952, Section 53A to 126B, criminal trover in the second degree. That's what this guy's charged with, criminal trover. A person is guilty of criminal trover in the second degree when, knowing that such person is not licensed or privileged to do so, such person uses the personal property of another without the consent of the owner. And that results in damage or diminishes the value of the property or subjects such owner to economic loss, fine, or other penalty. So the guy walks up, he knows he's not allowed to use the car, and he uses the car anyway. And so that's criminal trover. Now, the fact that he got in the car and drove off with it very well could be a form of theft also. But it depends on how they define that in Connecticut. And so every state's going to have a bunch of these things in there. And they hope that they've covered everything. Because there's always going to be some wacky set of facts that's going to come along where somebody's going to go, that doesn't quite fit that. So if you're curious about what criminal trover in the first degree is, it says a person is guilty of criminal trover in the first degree when he forcibly enters or forcibly removes the ignition of a motor vehicle of another and uses the motor vehicle without the consent of such owner. And then the rest is the same. It results in loss or damage, et cetera, et cetera. And so you realize that that was aimed specifically at auto theft, where people would get into a car and bust the ignition to get it to run, or they'd bust into the car to steal it, okay? And then the second degree is simply personal property of another. And so a car would constitute that. But the guy didn't break into the car, and he didn't bust the ignition. Presumably the keys were in the ignition. So in case you're curious, though, I wanted to go through some more definitions here. The difference between theft and robbery is that theft is merely stealing someone's property, whereas robbery is using force or fear to take property from a person's immediate possession. And so that makes theft, of course, a less serious property crime. Robbery is more serious. And so I always like to tell people that if you want to see how laws evolve over time, you have to take a look at one of two things, either burglary or kidnapping. Burglary at common law, I'm talking about hundreds of years ago. The breaking and entering of a dwelling house of another in the nighttime with the intent to commit a felony therein. So to give you an example, you're walking through the woods, it starts snowing, you're lost, you're starving. All of a sudden the temperature drops to 35 degrees Kelvin. And I'm joking, you wouldn't survive that. And you come upon a cabin and you're going to die. The cabin's locked. You bust the door open, you go inside to warm up. You could argue to a jury that you are not going inside to commit a felony, you're going inside to try to save your life. Okay? Likewise, breaking and entering the dwelling house of another, okay? The dwelling house, the dwelling. So at common law, if you broke into somebody's barn, it wouldn't have been burglary. It would be something else. They probably have another name for it, but it wouldn't be burglary because burglary was a very serious thing. In some jurisdictions, burglary was equivalent to some of the other bad things that would get you locked up forever or possibly even strung up. Because the concept is that if people are at home in their own homes sleeping and someone breaks into the house to steal stuff or to hurt somebody, society does not want that to happen. So they're going to have a strong discouragement of that, okay? And then likewise, it had to happen during the night. At common law, it had to happen at night. What happened if it happened at dusk? But of course, what happens if it happens in broad daylight? So someone's sitting at home, hanging out, and it's high noon, and someone busts in to steal stuff. At common law, that was not burglary. It would be something else, again, but it wouldn't be burglary. And so over the years, they've defined this. Most states now have different classifications of burglary, and they'll have the one that fits this, where you break into somebody's dwelling at night with the intent to commit a felony. But I've seen it before, for instance, where somebody was arrested for shoplifting. And they go, "Why are you arresting me?" And they go, "You're being arrested." For what? Burglary. And I've seen people go look at the cop like, "What?" Because you entered a building with the intent to commit a felony. And it didn't require you to break in, didn't require to be at night, didn't have to be somebody's home. And so over the years, these things have evolved with time. But one of my favorites is kidnapping. And I mean favorites to discuss, okay? Because kidnapping at common law was the unlawful restraint of a person's liberty by force or show of force. Now, it says here, and I've got this off the internet, under modern law, crime usually requires victim be taken to another location or concealed. But keep in mind that most people think of kidnapping as, you grab somebody, you take them away, and then you send a note and say, "Hey, we've got this person. If you want to ever see them again, send us money." Kidnapping for ransom. But that's different. That's different. So believe it or not, and I like to discuss this with people and point these things out, that if you were a cashier at a 7-Eleven, I'm talking about common law, someone walks into the store and they've got their hand underneath their clothing and they make that motion as if they've got something under there. And they go open up the cash register and step back. And you open the register and you step back. And you think they've got something underneath their shirt. And they reach over, they grab a bunch of money, and they take off running. That's a great law school exam question because most people go, oh, it's robbery. Person, force, or show of force took money from somebody, therefore it's robbery. When I said step back and the person stepped back through the show of force, kidnapping. Because the law doesn't say how far you have to move them or how much you have to restrain their liberty. But the fact is that using the force, you did in fact have them move against their will. And I talk about this a lot because I did the book about the Italian Hall disaster. And that's where 73 people died in a crowded hall when somebody yelled fire and there's no fire on Christmas Eve 1913 in Calumet, Michigan. And the head of the union was in town when that happened, and he started sending out telegrams to the outside world saying, hey, we need an investigation of what just happened here in Calumet. 73 people just died. And it's a horrible tragedy, but we think somebody can be found who's, behind it. And a group of local businessmen and a delegation of sorts went to visit him at his room, and talking about the room at his hotel, where they beat him up, dragged him out of the building, hauled him through the streets of Hancock over the bridge to Houghton, and threw him on a train with a one-way ticket to Chicago and said, if you ever come back here, we will kill you. And the local newspapers said that the man had been deported. He was deported. And the weird thing is that a lot of historians since that time refer to the deportation of Charles Moyer, the deportation. And now I'll admit, I'm the first lawyer who came along and wrote about the story. And I just said, let's call it what it is. It's a kidnapping. The man was kidnapped, along with everything else. He was also assaulted and battered and all that. But he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped. But the thing is that once you get somebody's mindset to where it's like, oh, he was deported. I hear about people being deported all the time. He was deported. It almost sounds legal. Except they dragged him through the streets of the town and threw him on a train and said, if you ever come back here, we'll kill you. That's not a deportation. That is a kidnapping, my friends. And what's amazing is the names of the kidnappers were published in the paper the next day to congratulate them for deporting the head of the union because somehow it's his fault that all these people died up in Calumet, which of course it wasn't. But way off track here. The point is here a guy stole a cop car with a cop still in it. And yes, he's been charged with a whole bunch of things, including second-degree kidnapping. Kidnapping. And so there, the kidnapping is the guy's in the car and the perpetrator jumps into the car and drives off with this guy. And therefore, this guy here is having his liberty or ability to move restrained by this guy through some threats, etc. So, second-degree larceny, second-degree kidnapping, assault of public safety personnel, and second-degree criminal trover, along with the interfering with an officer. So Eva Zamaris wrote that. WTNH published it. Chris sent me, thanks a lot. Man accused of stealing New Haven police cruiser with officers still inside. He's now facing charges. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Slaw. Will that be one side of slaw or two?